those who don't know me, my name's Louise Langridge. I'm the APAC MD for Morgan McKinley. I'm delighted to bring to you the second in our thought leadership series in this webinar. And it's really a sort of a hot topic at the moment. So I'm delighted to introduce Michael Predis, CEO and founder of Faethm. They've been doing some really interesting work and data insights and providing that research to governments and private sector organizations around the world, just looking at how digital transformation and automation is impacting our countries, our companies, and how we work. What's been really interesting to see as well is with COVID-19 and how that's impacted how this journey is accelerated for so many organizations as they're looking at how they mobilize behind their sort of digital channels. So I might hand over to Michael. We've said that we're just going to keep questions to the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and we'll tackle them all at the end. So I might just hand over to Michael to take you through it. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, everybody. Louise, thank you to you and the team at Morgan McKinley for the opportunity to share Faethm with your network. I thought what I might do is just to headline how we'll proceed over the next half hour or so. So I'll just do a short introduction just to tell people a bit about me and my background and how I came upon the issue of future of work. Then I'll do a screen share and talk through about 10 slides or so that just visualize what Faethm is, what we do, how we've grown. Then I'll flick into a demo of the platform and just talk through some of the features, particularly around reskilling and workforce transformation. Then I'll go to COVID-19 and some of the features that we've built there, and then finish up with just some discussions around what COVID-19 and the future of work means when they intersect and how different companies and governments around the world are experiencing this. So that should leave 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes at the end for questions if you'd like it. Just to introduce myself first, so I'm British, I've lived in Australia for nearly 20 years, and I've got about 20 or so years experience in product design and product development. In the end of 2008, I set up a product design company in Sydney, just as the global financial crisis began. And because we pioneered a way of designing and building products with data, we grew very quickly through the GFC, and by 2012 we're operating across Asia. My business was then acquired by the Boston Consulting Group, and that acquisition became BCG Digital Ventures. So the global practice for digital ventures was born out of the acquisition of my business. I became a partner at BCG, and I was the managing director of BCG Digital Ventures for Asia. And so in the course of doing all that work, I was working in many industries at very senior levels in about 25 different countries, mostly in Asia, but also in Europe and North America. And going back to about 2012, 2013, I started to see a pattern. And the work that we were doing was tech strategy, business model design, digitization, automation, workforce transformation, all these different projects that many of you guys will be very familiar with. But it started to occur to me that every client I was working with was asking us to do this work because they had two questions. And this is before future of work or fourth industrial revolution or any of these things were named. Everyone was worried and trying to understand what's the impact of technology over time? How will technology change my business in the future? And the second question is, what does this impact of technology mean for my people? So how do I need to change my workforce and give my people opportunities to be productive in this future of work? And so while still at BCG, I initiated some work with Australia's National Research Organisation to look at the effect of emerging technology on Australian jobs and companies. I then left BCG and set up Faethm to really productise that work. So at this point, I might just flick into the first of the things I want to share with you. Just make sure I'm on the right page. So just to sort of visualise the problem, most people will be very familiar with the terms future of work and fourth industrial revolution. And we're familiar because there's lots of research that's been done. All the big consulting firms and research organisations have produced these reports that tell us about the impact of technology on jobs. The problem with these reports is that in a world that's characterised by exponential change in technology, a PDF report lasts for about 3 or 4 months and then it's out of date. The second problem is that none of these firms use the same methodology, none use the same data, as they all have different answers. The third problem is that once we read the reports and we have this general sort of picture view of what the future of work means, we then all have one key question reports can't help us with, which is, what does this mean in my company? What does it mean in my community? What does it mean to my job or the jobs of my family? And so there's this challenge that people have where we know that something's happening, but it's very difficult for us to understand what that means in a particular context. So we've built a software platform to help companies, governments, educators like learning and development platforms and universities and investment firms all over the world to understand and to be able to model, if I deploy a particular technology into a particular context of work, what does that mean for the jobs and skills in my community or in my employees? Because the platform's unique and because we've been able to build a high degree of accuracy in it, we've grown very quickly. So 3.5 years ago, we spent about a year building the first version of the platform. We launched in October 2017, and we now have clients in 21 industries in 24 countries. In the last few months, we've opened offices in London and San Francisco, and we're advertising and hiring now in New York. One of the reasons for that rapid growth is that we've built a global partner ecosystem of 31 of the world's biggest technology and consulting firms, all of whom use Faethm with their clients. And so they're driving a lot of that growth. This gives you just a picture of some of the organizations that we're working with, and you probably recognize many of the logos. And similarly, on the government side, there are governments all over the world that use Faethm for policy purposes across areas like employment, education, industry investment, infrastructure investment, and so on. What's driving a lot of that growth is the underlying analytics. And so all of what I'm about to talk to you here is proprietary and built by Faethm. And really there are 4 key modules of analytics that lift up into the SaaS layer. So the first thing we've built is a technology adoption model. So this describes the effects of every known emerging technology on every industry and company in the largest 152 countries. And we do that by describing a global availability S-curve that talks about how these technologies come out of the labs and how they mature over 15 years. And then country and industry specific adoption S-curves that talk about how different companies in different locations use those technologies when they become available. So there's a lot of jargon in what I've just said. So to simplify it, if you took voice AI as an example of emerging tech, we've got a global assessment for how voice AI will mature over the next 15 years, and an assessment of how financial services in France, Finland, and the Philippines will use it. On the right-hand side, we have an occupation ontology. Now, we're about to, in about a month, go through a major upgrade. So we're on version 2.6 at the moment, and we're about to go to 3.0 at the beginning of June. Currently, we analyze and we have details on the 72,000 known jobs. This is every current job and every currently described future job. And we analyze it, if you like, at the molecular level. So we look at all the different attributes of every known job, 244 attributes across skills, knowledge, abilities, context and style and activities, technical skills, 20,000 tasks. We've already collected data on over 2 billion jobs around the world. What holds it together in the middle are 4 different AIs. And the 2 on the left-hand side, we've basically taught them to understand if you deploy a particular technology into a particular context of work, you affect the supply and demand for the elements of that job. So to give you an example and to continue the voice AI example from before, if we deployed voice AI into a call center, some of the tasks in the call center are automated, but some are augmented, so we're able to do more, and some are added. There are new things we need to do. And because we have this holistic view of the effect of technology, we're able to show companies that this is not the end of work. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the media about the jobs Armageddon, the hollowing out of white collar jobs, the end of blue collar work, universal basic income, and all these issues, and we just don't believe that they're real. We think that there will be automation, but in many cases, those people will not be made redundant. They will be given opportunities to have their jobs augmented. So some tasks automated, other tasks augmented. And that implies learning and development. It implies skills development. It implies that this is a transition from jobs of today to jobs of tomorrow. The third AI in the top right deals with ingestion of client data. So we take 6 data points about every employee from our clients, and we take census data when we work with governments, and the AI deals with ingestion, and so it automatically maps that data into the platform, and it means that clients get set up very quickly at very low cost. The fourth AI powers the jobs corridor, and I'll show you that on the platform. Just a few points. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but just to give your network and the people on the call a bit of confidence that what I've said is true. We're the first company in Asia and the 16th in the world to be invited to join the Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the World Economic Forum. Because of the amount of data that we've built and the work that we've done over the last couple of years, the forum also asked me to join the Global AI Council. So I sit on that council. I'm one of 32 people. Other people on the council include the president of Microsoft, the chairman of MasterCard, the minister for AI from the United Arab Emirates, professors from Carnegie, Stanford, Oxford, and so on. So it's what I would think a very scary room for me to be in. I'm not there because of me, I'm there because of the amount of data that we've got. We're also the first non-British company to win a UK government's Tech Rocket Ship Award for AI. And as you can see across the rest of the chart, we're featured in media and various kind of technical studies very often. Now, I want to shift a little bit before I show you the platform to just show you, how the platform's being used. So here we've got a photograph. This is the head of workforce innovation at Intel demoing the Faethm job corridor to the Singaporean government. Here we have in Europe something called skillsbridge.lu, which you can look up today. So this is a live platform. This is a program by the Luxembourg government to give every adult in the whole country a personal learning and development plan to take them from jobs of today to jobs of tomorrow. SkillsBridge sits on top of Faethm software. In North America, we've got a program here called PlanX. It's built by the world's biggest public-private innovation hub called the Mars Discovery District, which is based in Toronto. It was funded by Google. It does a very similar job to what I just showed you in Luxembourg. And again, it sits on top of Faethm. So there are four main use cases to Faethm, going down the left-hand side. I'm going to come back and talk about the COVID-19 work in a moment. But what I'm going to do first of all is just stop the share and flick to the platform. Just bear with me 1 second. So I'm just logging in here to the normal platform. This is housed on AWS. So this is the live platform that you would see anywhere around the world. And I'm going to go to a UK example of a bank. I often find when I'm doing demos that it's useful to use a company, the sort of company that we all understand, but one sort of outside of our normal scope, so that we can kind of just analyze it in a fairly non sort of personal way. So Faethm is partly a scenario modeling tool and partly a tool to help companies to drive future of work outcomes in their workplaces. And so over the course of a period of time, we can set a technology strategy to deploy any one of these different technologies. We can do this and analyze this across the whole company. We can show by location and go down to suburbs. We can do it by employee level, age, and gender. And what we see in the dashboard is some insights about which technology has the biggest impact and what the effect is on automation, augmentation, and additional work. We go through the analytics, which I'm not going to go through every single piece, it'll just take too long. But we show the automation impact of this scenario, the augmentation impact, we show which locations jobs will be created or automated in. We show the effect of different technologies and what the technology is worth over time. But where I want to spend most time, because I think it's probably most relevant to people on this call, is to focus on what does this mean for jobs and work. So as I mentioned, when we deploy a particular technology across the whole business, we have an effect on the work that we do. So let's look at financial analysis. There's a proportion of that work that's automatable, and that adds up to about 36 FTEs. Many, many more are augmented in the course of the next few years, and there's a proportion of work that's not impacted. If we stretch this out and perhaps look at a slightly longer sort of time frame, we get a different assessment. So what this lets us do is to say in the near term, in the short term, the next 12 months, or in the course of the longer term, what is the effect of technologies inside a particular job? We can identify this by locations and employee levels until we get very, very precise on who's affected. We can also look at what jobs are added. So many people know that we're going to need a lot more people in different occupations in the future. But what we can do now is start quantifying the number of people who will be needed to deliver on these sorts of technology goals. We can show the gender impact. And this is something that I really want to spend a minute or two talking about. I don't know any company where the board and the executive team's values about diversity and equality, being a good place for both women and men to work, actually lines up with the CIO's automation agenda. In many cases, the CIO is accidentally automating more women than men. And the reason for that is that there are 3 industries worldwide that skew female automation over male. It's financial services, professional services, and retail. And the reason for that is that there are more women in jobs that are likely to be affected by automation because there are more women in those industries doing things like support work, administrative work, clerical work, call center work, job sharing work, more routine sort of junior accounting work. In other industries, skew male, so mining, manufacturing, agriculture, freight logistics, distribution, they skew male. In this case, we're looking at a bank, so we're seeing more women being impacted. There's a very interesting geographic overlay as well. That first group of industries, financial services, professional services, and retail, tend to be metro industries. The second group tend to be regional. And so we start seeing a regional or location imbalance in the number of people affected, depending on what gender they're in. So there's some quite rich information we can produce. And again, as I keep saying, we can go down to the organizational unit in every location to work out exactly who's affected. Probably the part of the platform that's used the most, and so I want to spend probably a bit more time on this, is the job corridor. And the thing that the Intel photograph will show. And the organisation I've got here is a list on the left-hand side of all of the roles at risk of automation, rank ordered by the numbers of FTEs at risk. On the right-hand side, we've got jobs they could move to, and at the bottom, we've got the skills pathway. So if we go through this list, we can see there's a large number of different roles. But one of the jobs that I often focus on is accountants. We all know what accountants are, and we all know, because the media has told us, that accountants will be fewer in number in the future. So if we click on accountants, what Faethm's doing here, and this is the 4th that I mentioned, it's going away and it's calculating what jobs could these accountants do next. And so we represent that with this pivot score on the top right. And a pivot score describes 4 things. We want to send people to jobs that are in more demand, in the same location, paying about the same, and it rank ordered by the shortest possible skills gap. So as a separate thought, we know that there's a global cybersecurity talent shortage, and we all know why that is. I don't need to describe it. So when we click on cyber analysis, we can see here at the bottom that what Faethm's doing is going away and is calculating the gap between accountants and cyber analysts. And it turns out it's a very small gap. If you've got the skills to be an accountant, you've probably got the skills to be a cyber analyst. The ability to be an accountant, you have the ability to be a cyber analyst. They do very similar activities. And if you think about it intuitively, it makes sense. They're educated, numerical, analytical people who work in a corporate environment, in a small team, analysing numbers, creating patterns and insights that they give to management to make better decisions. The gap is a knowledge gap. And this knowledge gap is a trainable gap. So we can identify the specific gaps between jobs at risk of automation and jobs that we need more of in the future. And we can show what the learning and development pathway is to get people from jobs that won't be here tomorrow to jobs that will keep them employed. And that's the whole point of the future of work. It's the whole point of everything we do. We can identify which jobs are at risk, and we can provide learning and development to help those people advance. What we can also do with the job corridor is say, well, if perhaps we're looking at a different type of job, let's say, for example, a more junior role, let's say a loan officer, there's 430 nearly loan officers that are likely, and we probably won't find 430 jobs in the business in public relations or in marketing managers. So what we can do is toggle here to all jobs. Now, this is all jobs in the community. The first jobs are jobs inside the bank. This toggle here takes us to all jobs in that geographic area. And so now what we can do is start providing these people with training so that they can, as they leave the bank, go into work in other jobs in the community that are in more demand, and therefore not have to suffer kind of redundancy without another job to go to. So at this point, I'm just going to come into now the last few minutes of the overview. And again, I'll stop sharing the screen. I'll go back to the presentation, and I'll just talk about our work with on COVID-19. So, you'll remember in the course of the intro that I talked about the analytics model, and we have on the left-hand side this global availability S-curve and a country adoption S-curve. Well, about 9 or 10 weeks ago, it seemed obvious that what was happening in Wuhan was going to become a pandemic. We were seeing the first cases in Italy, the first couple of cases in North America, and it seemed that a pandemic was about to happen. And so Faethm then responded very quickly, and we swapped out the technology global availability curve for a global pandemic curve. And we swapped national adoption curves for a national epidemic curves. And we built a brand new neural network, and we applied that neural network to the occupation ontology. And we analyzed the risk of every worker in every job in every industry and their risk of workplace transmission, so that we could identify what were the key drivers of risk in the workplace as a result of an epidemic in that country resulting from a global pandemic. And what we found are two key things, which are, again, intuitive, but now backed up with a lot of data. That the two key issues is firstly, the amount of time you spend in interacting with others. And because we have this very, very rich task model, 20,000 tasks describing 72,000 jobs, we can identify not only that somebody interacts with someone else, but is that interaction with a customer or a colleague? And therefore, if it's a customer, the higher volume of people, whether the interaction is by phone or by in person, again, different types of risk. And we can also identify what proportion of a job is remotable. Now, we all know that many companies around the world have sent their people home. They've said, go home and do your work from home. My guess, though, and the experience of our clients, is that very few of those people are working at anything like January's level of productivity. Many people are able to work from home, but many more cannot do all of their job from home. And so what we're now providing, to go back to the platform, is some tools to help our clients understand exactly what to do in the face of coronavirus. And at this point, I'm going to switch and show you a manufacturing company in the US, because it's a bit of a more diverse data set, and it's a bit easier to explain the COVID-19 features. So again, here, just to explain the structure, we've got a manufacturing company in the US. It's a demo, but it's based on real clients. And we've got all the different business units, and it's across every location. We go down to the individual cities or counties. And if we now flick into the remote ability features, what we're looking at here are features that we've built in the last few weeks using the new neural network to analyze the risk of workplace exposure to coronavirus, and therefore to help companies and governments understand what to do next. And so you'll see these two factors from the neural net. On the y-axis, we've got remote ability, and on the x-axis, human interaction, and below, a list of everybody in the business. When we start kind of zeroing in on some of these, what we can see is these graphic designers are in highly remotable work. So 99.7% of their job is remotable. So go home, do your work. Going down a bit lower, we've got purchasing managers. 84% of their job is remotable. So what happens to that 16%? Down here, we've got hardware engineers, or over here, a marketing manager. So the question here with a marketing manager is, if only 61% of their job is remotable, how do we redesign that job so that they're doing 61% of the job 100% of the time. What does that mean for business process design? What does it mean for training? What does it mean for learning and development? How do we engineer this so that these people can be effective from the workplace, effective from home if they're no longer in the workplace? A different type of risk is those people who are low remote ability. These people who you cannot get them to do their work from home. Now, there's a question here as to what is an essential job. So in order for this manufacturing company to stay in business, chances are it's going to need to have some of these people still in the workplace. This is an essential job to keep going. If we're not actually moving things, if we're not manufacturing things, if we're not driving things, then our business doesn't stay in business. So now, because these people have to stay in the workplace, we've got different questions. How do we keep them safe at work? Is it personal protective equipment? Is it introducing shift work to disperse people over time? Is it to remove every other desk in an office to give people more space? Is it to put perspex dividers up around people? And there's all sorts of workplace interactions or workplace interventions that we need to get on top of. Where we've got real problems is this group here, these machinists. There's 1,200 machinists, about 22% of the workforce is guys on the factory floor making the stuff that we sell. If we cannot protect them, then they either come to work and get sick, or they stay home and we don't make anything, the business doesn't survive. So now we've got, again, different interventions. Which of these machinists are older? Because we know that coronavirus has more serious implications for older people. Are there older workers that we can substitute for younger workers? Can we furlough older workers and say, look, go home, stay home, you keep your job, we'll bring younger people in temporarily. But then how do we train those younger people to do that work? And so there's a lot more I could show you on this, but perhaps the last thing to show you is how everything I've just described, what this means for our thought leadership and some of the work we've been able to do with governments. So if you just bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to open up a report. And this is something that, you should now be able to see. Let me just try and share that screen again. Here we go. So this is a report that was published yesterday by MIT Technology Review, and it describes Faethm's work to analyse COVID-19 on the workforce. It's all about what's happening in the USA, but the fact that we're an Australian company with data about the USA that's being written about by MIT hopefully shows everybody that we can do this for any country. So we've got this information, we can provide this for any country. And so there's a couple of charts in here that I really want to kind of show to you. So, and it's really about how the future of work and automation is now intersecting with this issue of COVID-19. So this chart here, high-risk US jobs based on coronavirus. So these are frontline jobs, the essential workers, you have to have them in workplace. They cannot do their jobs from home. And then it says, what proportion of these jobs are augmentable or automatable? And the size of the bubble refers to the numbers of people. So you can see here the numbers of millions of people in the US in those jobs. And so 2 examples. Top left, we've got near the 16%, we've got a large group of nurses. Now these are low automation jobs, but there's a lot that we could do with technology to augment them and to make them more productive. There's a very, very strong and very obvious reason about why we should be investing to make nurses more productive. On the right-hand side, we've got a group of cashiers. Again, a similarly large group, and they are much more automatable. And this is where I think the future of work and automation and coronavirus have created a whole new dynamic. In January, you never would have said, automate all cashiers, because you would have been worried about their livelihoods. In April, we would say, you must automate all the cashiers, because now we're worried about their lives. These people are in harm's way. They're essential workers. We have to go to the shops. We have to buy food. These people are at risk, and we can automate that job, and we probably should to protect those people. So I think coronavirus and automation and the future of work have, in a very, very short space of time, reframed the whole discussion and introduced a new value set that means that when we consider automation and we consider the future of work, we're now doing so in a very different way. So I think at that point, Louise, that's probably about half an hour or so. And I probably stop the slide share and the demo, and happy to have any questions and perhaps more of a free-flowing discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't got anything in the Q&A yet. So if anyone would like to ask Michael a question, I know there's a lot of information there. Please just drop it in the chat or in the Q&A at the bottom of your screens, and we will try and get through all of those. I've got a question for you, Michael, while we just sort of wait for any others. In terms of what you're seeing, more forward-looking organisations that maybe have been slower to automate, what sort of things are you seeing people are doing now in terms of their response to the coronavirus epidemic?
Well, firstly, I think almost every large company has reached for robotic process automation. So there's a lot of work we're doing, particularly in North America and in Europe, with organisations like Blue Prism. And so RPA, robotic process automation, is being used. And I was talking to the managing director of the Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Future of Work this morning, and he said that the term he's hearing is that COVID-19 has slingshot us to 2023. So I think a lot of the RPA work that was being discussed is now being bought. So number one, I think it's accelerated some of that robotic process automation work. In manufacturing context, it's harder to introduce robotics. It's more expensive. It's a much more capital intensive program. But if you look at the share price of the leading robot manufacturers around the world, they've just gone up and up and up over the last few weeks. And I think that's just a big signal that what we're about to see is probably a fast tracking of technology deployment, because companies are so concerned about sustainability and productivity. So number one, I think it's sped up the technology agenda. Number two, I think it's had a really dramatic effect for the positive in the public's interactions with healthcare. So telehealth is something that's just booming. So I read that it took 7 days for the National Health Service in the UK to switch off all GP surgeries and to switch on remote diagnosis. And I think we can expect that the quality of remote healthcare is going to get a major boost as a result of coronavirus. I think number three, there are many technologies that we've taken for granted and perhaps companies have got a little bit complacent about. And I think some of them are just things like video conferencing. You know, many times over the last few weeks, I've talked to companies, you know, large global accounting firms or law firms, and they say things like, we're not allowed to use Zoom. and so I think some of these basic technologies are going to get a real kickstart. And then I think lastly, I think even when we all go back to work, I think elements of remote working will still stay in place. I think we're all learning how to be effective remotely. And so I think that means that there are many people who will take the opportunity to stay working from home. And then I think perhaps finally, that then has big implications for real estate and office design. So, you know, if you have a team of 1,000 people and you're thinking, well, actually, over the course of coronavirus, we all learn to work pretty well from home. You might take the opportunity to redesign your offices. And rather than everybody having a desk, you might say, well, we're going to actually have half people have desks and half the people will rotate through a day or two a week, and we'll have much more creative spaces and collaborative spaces. So, so I think real estate redesign will happen as well.
I've just got a chat, it's not a question, but amazing insights. So thank you, Michael, amazing insights. If anyone's got a question, please pop it in the chat or Q&A. I've got lots of questions. Whenever I speak to Michael, I've always got lots of questions for him. So I'll keep asking, but if anyone else has got someone, we've got Michael's time, please feel free to add them in the Q&A. And one of the things that we are always getting asked for by organisations is what should they be telling their people in terms of what should they be reskilling, etc. Yeah. So if you're thinking about sort of particularly sort of in sort of professional services and sort of in developed organisations, what are some of the roles that they should be considering? If you're in an accounting role, you've touched if you're in, what other roles that you should be considering reskilling in?
Okay, so this is a really good and super common question. Everyone wants to know, what should I do next? And so because of this, I want to spend a couple of minutes answering this, because I think it's important for everyone. And so rather than kind of go through the answer quickly, I'd rather slow down, Louise, and just spend a couple of minutes answering. So there are actually three different answers, or three parts to the answer. This is a little bit complicated, but computers are good at the jobs we find hard and bad at the jobs we find easy. And I'll explain that a bit more. So as human beings, we're not built to carry heavy objects. We're not built to do repetitive tasks. We're not built with calculators or processors. You know, we're not built to fetch things from A to B, or work in burning buildings, or do things that are dull and boring. Right? And we've always used tools throughout history to do those things. And it's just got to the state that those tools are getting better than us, and we're giving them a degree of intelligence. And those tools will always do those things better than us. But those tools, which are now, you know, computers and robots, find it very difficult to do the things that are fundamentally human. Care, compassion, imagination, ingenuity, dealing with risk, dealing with ambiguity, motivating others, you know, being able to empower people or lead people or communicate with people. And I think anybody in doing a task or doing a job with a lot of tasks in that first group has to expect a degree of automation to come in their job. But if they can make that transition now to jobs that are fundamentally more human, that involve interaction with other people, involve synthesizing some body language or some communication and applying that in a new way, those are jobs that are safe in the future. So I think anybody in a professional role, in a developed or you know, in a company that's you know, got, you know, in a professional, you know, business, then what I'd be urging them to do is to start looking at not so much how do they produce information, but how do they apply information. That's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is to look at the history of work, and let's go back 20,000 years. You know, 20,000 years ago, your job was everything. You know, you fed yourself, clothed yourself, protected yourself, kept yourself well and healthy, and probably died at about 30 years old. Right? And you go forward 15,000 years to about 5,000 years ago, and we all did that, but we learned a barterable skill. So we produced an excess of crops, or we protected other people. And we still did a lot of stuff ourselves, but we swapped this thing for something else. Go forward, you know, to about 500 years ago, and we became hyper specialists. So we became accountants, and we tried to become CFOs, right? Or we became, you know, whatever the pathway, but we were in that very, 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 very kind of linear journey. And I think 20, 30 years ago, we started this kind of pattern now of generalization, of kind of moving laterally or diagonally through different occupations in quite a deliberate way. And I think that has taught us to be generalists, to be able to synthesize, to be adaptive, and those are critical skills for the future. The last part of the answer is the quickest, and it's I saw a strip cartoon about a year ago, like a 2x2, and it's a father talking to his daughter in the year 2000 and in 2020. And in the year 2000, he's saying to his daughter, look, you know, it's fine if you want to be, you know, a ballerina, but just make sure you've got something like accounting or law to fall back on. And in 2020, he's saying, look, you know, fine if you want to be an accountant, just make sure you've got something artistic to fall back on. And I think
that's very true.
Right. So I think that's basically the shift that we're seeing.
We've got a question here for you. What will be the main trends for automation you could foresee for the near futures, or right after COVID-19 is resolved?
I think really it'll be the bedding in of a lot of the technologies that are very early now. I think, as I mentioned a minute or two ago, I think we're seeing an acceleration in these technologies. So things like robotic process automation, the use of robots in manufacturing, or the use of robotic processes in you know, banks or retailers, I think that's going to be the defining characteristic over the next 24 months. I think really every company will probably be looking at, you know, it doesn't matter what country they're in or how badly that country is being affected right now. Even places like Australia, where there's been a very, very small instance of coronavirus, companies are saying, What if there's a second wave? What if there's a third wave? What if the virus mutates? What if we're not able to travel? What if there is a long-term recession? What if the recession that we're going into is U-shaped and drags out? And unfortunately, I think people are starting to prepare for the worst. And in order to do that, they're really spending a lot more time and money with their robotic process automation and robotic automation. So number one. I think number two, it's probably too early at this stage to be able to describe the effects of the recession I think is now beginning. But I do think, unfortunately, we are entering recession. We just have to look at, some of the figures coming from different parts of the world. China has just had its first quarter of negative growth in 50 years. I mean, China survived everything in the last 20, 30 years or so. And you think of all the issues that have happened, and this has given them their first quarter of negative growth. Look what's happening in the US, 26 million people hitting the unemployment queue in the last few weeks. And unfortunately, and I hate to say this because it's not happy news, but when you look at the world's two biggest economies and you're seeing these sorts of numbers, that probably means we're going into a pretty heavy recession. And therefore, I think we're going to see a lot of companies start saying, okay, well, how do we remain productive? What does that mean for our people? Probably cutting back on some of the staff programs like learning and development, and probably spending more money on automation. So I'd hate to say this, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I think there are opportunities in all of this, but I think globally we'll probably see companies speed up automation, and that will have different effects in different industries. But yeah, I expect it probably to quicken what we're seeing.
Absolutely. It's an interesting one you said about the learning and development, because with all of this and what you've spoken about, it's the reskilling that's so important. And if organisations are slowing that down, it's going to be a challenge for us as we look to reskill people.
Yeah, but I think there's a solid business case for learning and development. But the problem is that it takes the organisation to think more than 12 months ahead. And not every organisation does that very well. Some organisations are very tactical. And I think if leaders of organizations can think 18 months, 24 months, 36 months ahead, then it's obvious you can't shrink to be a great company, right? You need to have a certain number of people in the business. And it's cheaper to retrain and redeploy than to make redundant and rehire. So provided that those companies can think more than a year ahead, and because a lot of companies are going to come under pressure to maintain margins in the next 12 months and to maintain their total shareholder return back to investors. But those companies that have strong leaders and those governments that can create the right environment will allow those companies to invest in learning and development so that they're able to have those people in the right place at the right time with the right technologies when we come out.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting question. What are the challenges synchronizing the upstream supply of education, training, organizations, governments, etc., and industry workplace demand of the skills we're going to need to pivot to? What
a question.
$1 million question.
No, yeah. That is a hugely insightful question. So I don't know who asked that, but I'm really impressed. When I showed you the job corridor, there were 3 components. So 1 was the jobs at risk, 2, the jobs they'll go to, and 3, the skills pathway. Currently, there's no number 4, but there will be. So number 4 is where Faethm will integrate learning and development platforms and their content so that our clients can access training to answer that question. And so we're talking to some of the world's biggest learning and development companies now. So for example, Pearson or D2L, KeyPath, Go1. And Go1 recently got a lot of investment from Microsoft. Pearson is known as the online university. We also have universities all over the world that use Faethm to design curriculum and to be able to reach out to enterprise and say, we think you have this skills gap, we have a course to solve it. So, I might be a university local to you using Faethm and saying, well, I know in my community there's 1,000 accountants and I know that there's 1,000 cyber analysts needed and I'm going to develop some training to solve that gap. So number 1, we are integrating learning and development providers into Faethm to be able to distribute that content. Okay. Number 2, we're seeing a shift away from the 12-month or 2-year business graduate courses. My old boss used to say that the half-life of training is about 30 minutes unless you apply it. right? You forget most of it. It goes in one ear, out the other. And so I think what we're seeing now is a move away from graduate degree courses and sort of long-term courses like MBAs to much more skills-based courses. So rather than 12-month courses, 12-day courses, 12-hour courses, that let you apply that information in context so that you actually attain that skill. And that's being matched by a shift all over the world towards what's called micro-credentialing. So this is about giving people, rather than a certificate saying you have this degree, a certificate that says you have this component. And you can add these things together and get a degree, but you can add these things together in different combinations so that it fits your own pathways. So I think there's a real revolution happening. And you know, like many things, fintech, biotech, this one's edtech. And there's a lot happening in education technology to provide skills development at scale. And you know, Faethm's a platform that's helping companies to do that.
I think it's fantastic that because I think giving people the insight on what's coming and then helping them with the tools they need to reskill is fantastic. That's becoming the next integration. Just one other question, which actually follows on from L&D that we've received, is what is your view on how learning and development will change in light of automation? And you've touched on some of that. Yep. Traditional course learning, on the job, or self-learning through trial and error was the question.
I think unfortunately it will probably go much more self-learning online, and I think that's unfortunate because not everyone learns very well like that. There are three main modes of learning and taking in information. One is visual. So I'm a visual person. I can read something, it goes in and it tends to stay. I'm a bad listener, right? So I write everything down that I hear. When I'm in a meeting, I
love a note.
Right, I make heaps of notes. I never look at them, but writing it down is my visual way of learning. So some people are visual, some people are auditory, and some people are action-based. They need to do it in order to learn it. They're experiential. And the problem with online learning is that it limits the auditory and the interaction learning. So I think it would be very difficult to learn how to drive a car from behind a computer. It would be very difficult to learn how to diagnose a patient, if you're a nurse or a doctor or whatever, from a computer screen. You need to have some interaction with that person. And so I think there's going to be a shift towards online learning, but what I'm very hopeful of is that there will be funding and innovations in physical learning. And I wonder sometimes whether places like shopping malls are going to become fantastic places for the community to gather around more interactive learning. So particular communities setting up learning and development based on the industries they have in the area for people to come along and interact. I think short term it will go online, but I think people will quite quickly realize that online learning is useful, but not enough.
And if you were going to give people sort of takeaways, like skills that we should all be developing in ourselves, are there any big ticket ones that you just think everyone going through sort of the next year or so should be sort of trying to develop some more capability in certain skills?
Yeah, I think two, actually there are three. The first one is risk management, risk tolerance, and dealing with ambiguity. So we've been conditioned to be scared of the word risk. Right? Risks seem bad, but risks aren't bad. Risks are good. Risks are how we do stuff. Taking risks, sizing up, thinking should I, shouldn't I, going and finding some information, working out whether it's too much of a risk, and then doing it is what underpins innovation, is what underpins getting that new job. It's what underpins being able to date that person that you really like, you know, proposing, are you going to get married? I mean, it's all a risk, right? But in the workplace, we've been taught that risk is bad, but outside of work, we know that risk is good. You know, we look at the extreme sportsmen, or we look at the athletes, we look at these people who, you know, stake it all on gold. And I think I would really be encouraging people to understand what their personal risk appetite is, and then how they deal with uncertainty. We've also been taught that things are right and wrong, and school is responsible for this in many ways. You know, in maths, there's a wrong answer and a right answer. You know, you're meant to do it on your own. At school, collaboration is called copying, and we're told off for it.
Yeah.
Right? So we're told to come up with the singular right answer on our own. Right now, that never happens at work. At work, there are about 5 things you could do, and you figure that out with 5 other people.
Mm.
And so I think the way that you go about dealing with ambiguity and risk is something that, because the world is less certain, because things are changing much more, there are going to be many, many more decisions for you to make in the course of your job. So number one, don't be afraid of risk, and actually probably spend some time figuring out how to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
Linked to that, I think, is visualization. Some of us find that easier than others. But one of the characteristics of people who can deal with risk and who can work in an adaptive way is that they kind of have a bit of a picture in their head as to what it is that they're trying to do. And as I say, some people naturally do it and some people struggle. And so I think if you're someone who maybe doesn't find it necessarily easy to visualize, I would practice. Just start saying, what do I think I can get? What do I think I can do? You know, you hear the athletes, they visualize themselves crossing the line first, or they visualize a swim, like visualize the strokes, even, you know, in their sleep. And they're taught to visualize because visualization is a very powerful way of making us feel empowered to do something. If I can see myself doing it, I'll be much more confident about doing it.
So we've got two more questions that we've got 5 more minutes till the sort of to meet our sort of allotted times. So there's a question about, if you do feel your role is at risk of automation, where can you go as an individual to find appropriate information based on your current skills and what you need to reskill in?
Unfortunately, I don't know if there's a really good single place that I could recommend people to go. Faethm will be producing a consumer application later this year to answer that question for people. If you contact me, then we can get you on the list to have information when that comes through. I think going to places like the World Economic Forum, they tend to have quite good reports about jobs of the future. I think most people will probably not find that their job is automated this year. You know, I don't think things are happening that fast. I think in some cases there are, but I think generally speaking, most people are not going to suddenly go into, you know, have a talk with their boss in a week or two's time and find out their job's gone. I think it's something that's beginning, but I think outright job gone type automation is probably, you know, as I say, it's beginning, and different occupations are going to find it happening differently quickly. I think if you're on this call and asking yourself this question, you're already on that journey to what the next job is. And you're kind of self-selecting yourselves at the moment to be, you know, you're aware of this. You've taken time out to think about it. You know, you're listening to some talking head, you know, like sort of with a point of view. And I think that's probably what you should do. You know, I would try and soak up as much information as you can about this. You know, maybe sort of talk to friends or your boss or, you know, people in the community about the work that you could do. I'd also be sort of thinking about which are the growth industries in your particular location. You know, which industries can you say, well, in a recession, would I rather be working for a basic manufacturing company or some sort of interactive human services company? I think certain occupational areas or industries will be growth industries. So care, healthcare, and you know, aged and youth care, number one. Number two, education. I mean, for the reasons that we're talking about, education is a growth industry. You know, I think number three, creative services. We will always require people to make things, to design things, people to produce things in new and novel ways, or, you know, particularly you know, experiences and you know, things like that. I'd be really nervous about going to work for a high process, high routine industrial company right now.
And there's lots of research out there around jobs of the future, so I suppose probably worth sort of reading up on what some of those key roles are and skills, and hopefully sort of the learning and development opportunities behind them. One more question. It seems that organisations are taking very different approaches to the impact of COVID-19, whilst there'll be industry-specific approaches to certain challenges. Which common themes would you expect to see across the industry as a whole for the next 12 months?
So globally, or so Louise, can I just qualify that? Is that globally or in a particular region?
We're saying sort of across common themes we're likely to see in the next 12 months globally across industry.
Yeah, I think probably high levels of uncertainty. I mean, I think any manager right now who's telling their staff, I know that where you're going to be working in 3 months' time is probably needs their head read, including Donald Trump down, right? I mean, you know, these people that say it's safe to go back to work, you know, I mean, we're seeing second and third wave in Hong Kong and Singapore. The US is just one big wave. I mean, it's just so uncertain. I think even 3 or 4 months ahead, no one really would be saying, not even in Australia or New Zealand, would be saying, we're done with this now. We're okay. We're back. So high degrees of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is probably going to stop people from making any sort of big decisions. I think probably 6 to 12 months out, we'll start seeing companies that have kind of, you know, particularly some of the better companies say, we've actually really figured out how to do this particular thing remotely in a dispersed way. And so I think to make sure you're on the right side of that outcome, I would be starting to think now about how much you can embrace remote working, how much you can contribute to your team's thinking about the right processes to have in place to foster remote working. It wouldn't be good if in 6 or 8 or 9 months' time, you know, bosses start turning around and saying, well, we've figured out how to do remote working. We probably don't need everybody. And so, you know, a quarter of the team are going to go. And if that were to happen, you probably want to make sure you weren't in that quarter team. And probably a good way of doing it is by contributing to the process.
Absolutely. Very quick question, the final one we can hopefully tackle. With this rapid pace of change that everyone's experiencing, do you think there's going to be an increased demand for change managers to help people sort of navigate that change?
Yes and no. I think obviously we'll need people to manage it. I'm not sure that we'll need more people in change management roles per se. I think change management as a discipline, and I should preface this by saying that before I did my MBA, I did a graduate certificate in change management. So I have a bit of understanding about this. I think when I started doing that, it was about 2004, 2005. And I think everybody at that time expected change management to be a big thing, and it's not really. I think change management is done in a more generalist way as part of a consulting or business process change activity, which tends to be led by senior people in multidisciplinary teams. So you'll have a senior financial, product, design, manufacturing, you know, logistics person who will come together under the auspices of a general manager or chief operating officer or somebody running transformation. And there'll be a strategy component, a financial component, and a practical component. And collectively, that's change management. Change management has become more of an organizational development thing. Whereas when I studied it, it was more strategic and more holistic. And I think change management in an OD sense, it just depends on the company. Sometimes that role is just done by people in HR or OD. I'm not sure change management itself as a job title is where I would be going. I would be thinking more about how do I build change management skills into whatever I do at the moment.
Okay, fantastic. I think at that note, I'd like to just, on behalf of everyone that's attended today, thank Michael very much for all the insights that you've shared. We will be sending out to all the attendees the report that Michael referenced a bit earlier, the MIT report. So we'll share that with you and come back to you with some feedback. So thank you so much. Really valuable insights.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
The time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.